that's actually something I wanted to talk about as well, is like natural versus enhanced. Is it good to really think about it that way? Because I've always thought that that was kind of like, oh, it can be a little, natural guys obsessing over who's natural or not. And that's like the toxicity of the natty or not thing. And people being like,
Yeah.
oh, well, that guy's on drugs, I'll never have that. It's like, well, people are just making excuses for themselves, because obviously there's a ton of, well, maybe not a ton, but there's natural lifters who look amazing. And you could take it back to, the silver era, the guys, who weren't using drugs, they look amazing. Not compared to, like, I think that those physiques look amazing personally, but comparing them to bodybuilders today, they don't hold up. But anyways, like the whole natural versus enhanced thing, like, is it valuable to think of it in those terms?
Well, I guess there's sort of a spectrum of enhanced. Like, if you're on TRT, should your training really change appreciably? Probably not. Like, I have a few clients on TRT. I don't really. I mean, it doesn't really change stuff in practice very much. I think it matters most at the edge when you're getting very, very strong. Because part of the reason why, again, they train differently in many cases is just because of that risk of injury. Like that Ryan Crowley guy who tore his pec trying to incline 5 plates, that's not going to happen if you're natural, most likely. It's just, you're not going to be moving 5 plates anyway, most likely.
Whoa.
Yeah, like using 2 or 3 plates is going to be, much more reasonable, because the absolute load does matter in terms of just rates of injury. And I had a lot of people message me after that saying, oh, is incline bench pressing dangerous? But you have to realize, like, all the factors that went into that. He hadn't done the incline in months and months and months. He had an existing shoulder injury. He had already done a max set. It was way more weight than he had ever lifted. He was, benching with people who were stronger than him and egging him on. I mean, there were other factors as well. I did a whole video on it. But most people are not going to have all those factors, or probably any of those factors, if they're just doing a normal workout. Like, you're going to be progressively overloading. You're not going to be using that massive of a weight. Your technique is going to be good. He was using like partial range of motion, where, he was stopping right at the area where you have the most stress. So instead of going down and then reversing, he was just stopping at the moment where there's the most stress and trying to reverse it there, which, well, that's where it snapped. Like, right where he was about to reverse it, it reversed him. Uno reverse card, boom. And, when you step back from that situation, you can see why it happened, right? You can just say, okay, well, this, there's, a dozen factors as to why he got injured. And this is part of the reason why enhanced lifters train differently, because they see this happen on a much more regular basis. And they're like, oh no, you can keep that shit away from me. And so they go for more of the pump, the volume training, not going close to failure, the hard contractions, more machines, partial range of motion, etc. And this is very effective for them. But if you're a natural and you try to emulate this training style, I'm not going to say you get no results, because if you're a beginner, like, shit, everything is going to work.
Yeah.
But it is limited in the progression. And if you're trying to train like an enhanced lifter all the time, I mean, it's just, it has an expiration date for how far you can progress on that kind of thing. And almost all natural lifters that I encounter train quite similarly. There's differences, obviously, in exercise selection and then in amount of volume and the split, etc. But strength is almost always a main goal. Usually the volume is not super excessive. And then progression always has a clear path, and it's always a goal. It's never just like, oh, we're gonna feel the muscle working. It's more about where you're going with the movement than just doing it in the moment.
Yeah, I feel like as a natural, you need to work so much harder that it makes you, well, in most cases, I don't.
Yes and no. Yeah. So if you're on gear, you can either train way harder or not nearly as hard, and you'll get better results anyway.
Yeah.
So when people are like, oh, I just work hard, like these fake natties who are like, no, I just work hard. Yeah, if you're taking drugs, like that's one of the reasons why you can do huge amounts of volume, because you're not as sensitive to cortisol, you recover way faster, etc. And so, um, yeah, it's just not going to be as effective if you're natural.
And you also had a video, you were on a podcast, the Brains and Gains podcast, and you said something. I'm not going to put words in your mouth because I can't remember exactly what you said, but I feel like I think you said you need to consider whether or not you should be following as a natural some of these enhanced lifters, like whether or not their advice applies to you. And that actually made me think. At first, I was like, well, there's tons of, Mike Israetel, like, right? He has tons of great advice that naturals can use, but maybe like you said, you used him as an example that he sees things through a certain lens. As someone, it is not going to be the same. Like someone who has maxed out their genetic potential as a natural and someone who is enhanced, they're going to have different perspectives on training. I think it's just inevitable. And that's not to discredit both of those athletes worked hard. Like both of those people worked hard, but it's just, they're going to have different perspectives. And maybe like the natural guy who hit his genetic limit is going to have a better guidance.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things where, again, it does change the way you train quite a bit. Again, a lot of it is avoiding the injury, but then you can just get away with doing stuff that wouldn't work, right? Like if you're an advanced natural and you're doing stupid training, you just won't go anywhere. Like it just won't work. Whereas if you're enhanced, you could literally do anything in some cases. Like you can go in and just do the stupidest training plan, and especially if you have the genetic response to steroids, literally anything. I mean, you can do German volume training, super high volume, or you could do one set to failure. I mean, anywhere in the middle. And as long as like you're getting blood into those muscles, you're already getting elevated protein synthesis levels all the time, all week. And so, bro split completely fine, or train everything every day. Also fine because you're going to be recovering anyway. So it's like it's just everything is raised to 11, and suddenly your decisions don't matter apart from the dosage, because that does matter, especially over time as you need to increase those dosages to keep gaining. But in terms of like the programming, it's very much secondary to the steroids and then also to the genetics. And so, if you're natural, you don't have those luxuries. Like your programming decisions actually matter to a very significant degree. And so, if I went enhanced and I spent 10 years enhanced, after those 10 years, I'm not sure if my advice would be very good, because that's a long time to forget what it was like training naturally. And you see a lot of these guys, that's pretty much what has happened in large part, where a lot of their advice isn't quite going to be applicable to the average natural trainee in large part.